"Watch where you're going, sweetheart." The voice was thick with unearned confidence. Abigail looked up. A Navy petty officer, maybe a second class by the insignia on his sleeve, stood there with two of his friends. A smirk played on his lips. He was squarely in her path, having stepped directly in front of her. He hit her, and then he laughed. It wasn't a friendly chuckle, it was a dismissive, mocking sound that grated on the ear. His friends snickered along with him, their eyes roaming over her as if she were a piece of misplaced furniture. Abigail didn't react. She didn't gasp, she didn't flinch, she didn't fire back a retort. Her body remained perfectly still, her posture relaxed but rooted to the spot. Her gaze was level, her blue eyes calm and analytical. In that split second, she wasn't a civilian in a chow hall. She was assessing a threat. She noted his height, his weight, the way he carried himself, the slight unsteadiness that suggested he was either profoundly arrogant or had come from a pre-dinner happy hour. She saw the carelessness in his friend's eyes, the lazy cruelty of bored men looking for a distraction. "You made a mess," she said, her voice even and low, carrying no trace of fear or anger. It was a simple statement of fact. The petty officer's smirk widened. He enjoyed this. "Looks that way. Maybe you should clean it up. Then again, this area is for service members. You look a little lost. Are you looking for your husband?" One of his companions chimed in, leaning forward conspiratorially. "Yeah, is he an officer? Maybe he can get you a pass to the good dining hall next time." Abigail ignored the second sailor, her attention remaining fixed on the leader. "I'm here to eat. I'd appreciate it if you'd step aside so I can get another tray." The petty officer, Davies, as his name tape read, took a half step closer, invading her personal space. The smell of stale coffee and something faintly bitter, like cheap cologne, washed over her. He was trying to intimidate her, using his size and his uniform as a weapon. It was a common tactic, one she'd seen 100 times in 100 different places, from dusty foreign marketplaces to crowded bars back home. It was almost boring. "I don't think so," Davies said, his voice dropping into a patronizing drawl. "We have rules here. We can't just have anyone wandering in off the street. Let me see your ID." He held out his hand, palm up, demanding. The act was a clear assertion of power. He wasn't asking. He was ordering. Abigail reached into the simple canvas tote bag at her side and retrieved her wallet, pulling out the laminated card and holding it for him to see. She didn't place it in his waiting hand. He squinted at it, his lip curling in disdain. "A contractor ID. What do you do, file papers for some supply clerk? That doesn't give you full access, especially not during peak meal hours. This is for the warfighters." He punctuated the last word with a light poke to her shoulder. It was a gesture meant to be demeaning, to physically underline his verbal condescension. The casual contact sent a ripple through the background noise of the mess hall. A few nearby conversations faltered. The quiet ballet of a military dining facility, people moving with purpose, eating efficiently, avoiding eye contact, was momentarily disrupted. A few heads turned. Abigail's gaze didn't waver. "I'm authorized to be here," she stated again, the same unnerving calm infusing her words. "Now if you'll move." Davies seemed to feed off her composure, mistaking it for weakness. His annoyance was growing. She wasn't reacting the way he wanted. She wasn't getting flustered or teary. She wasn't deferring to him. He decided to escalate. "I'm not moving until I'm satisfied that you're not a security risk," he said, his voice rising slightly, drawing more attention. He was performing now, playing to his audience of two and the handful of others who were now openly watching. "For all I know, this ID is fake. We get dependas trying this stuff all the time, trying to get a free meal." He reached out and snatched the ID from her fingers. The plastic flexed under the pressure of his grip. He held it close to his face, scrutinizing every detail as if he were a master forger. "Carter, Abigail," he read aloud, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Says here you're cleared for all facilities. I find that hard to believe." He looked from the photo on the card to her face. "You don't look like you belong here." His friends snorted in agreement. They had closed in slightly, forming a loose, intimidating semicircle around her. To anyone watching, it was 3 uniformed sailors cornering a civilian woman. The injustice of it hung in the air, thick and foul. The pressure on her arm was a familiar anchor. It was the grip of a man who believed he was in control, who thought his strength and uniform gave him dominion over this space, over her. As his fingers tightened, a switch flipped in Abigail's mind. The brightly lit, noisy mess hall faded into a haze. Her eyes dropped for a fraction of a second, down to her canvas bag on the floor beside her. Pinned to the rough fabric was a small, unassuming strip of ribbon, barely an inch long, a simple design of navy blue, gold, and scarlet. The smell of overcooked green beans was replaced by the acrid, metallic tang of cordite and hot dust. The clatter of trays became the deafening, instantaneous crack of an IED detonation just meters from her vehicle's front tire. She felt the phantom weight of her flak jacket and helmet, the 70 pounds of gear that was a second skin for 12 months straight. Her hand twitched, her muscle memory searching for the familiar pistol grip of her M4. She could feel the grit of Fallujah sand in her teeth, see the blinding white sun glinting off a rooftop 400 meters away. She remembered the split-second calculation of returning fire while her ears rang, the desperate yell to check for casualties, the controlled, violent grace of clearing a building room by room. That little ribbon wasn't a decoration. It was a scar, a memory forged in a crucible of noise and fear and absolute clarity. The sailor's grip was nothing. His laughter was silence. This was not a threat. It was an annoyance. She brought her focus back to the present. The pressure on her arm remained. Her calm was not a choice. It was a conditioned response. Across the sprawling mess hall, at a long table occupied by a dozen Marines, Gunnery Sergeant Miller was methodically working his way through a piece of dry chicken breast. He was a man in his late 30s, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and left out in the sun. He'd been peripherally aware of the commotion, the loud voices of the Navy sailors, and had dismissed it as typical inter-service foolishness. But the confrontation wasn't dissolving. It was escalating. "Look at those squids," a young lance corporal at his table muttered, picking on a civilian. Gunny Miller's eyes narrowed. He didn't like it. There was an ugliness to it that curdled the stomach. He watched the woman. He noted her posture, shoulders back, head up, feet planted. It was subtle, but it was there. A stillness that didn't belong in a civilian. He'd seen that exact posture 1,000 times before, in Marines standing before a review board, in Marines about to step off for a patrol, in Marines holding a line that was about to break. Then he saw the sailor, Davies, snatch her ID. Miller's fork paused halfway to his mouth. That crossed a line. That was an abuse of authority, perceived or otherwise. He was about to stand up, to go over there and use his own considerable presence to end the farce, when the sailor grabbed the woman's arm. As he did, her bag on the floor shifted. The overhead fluorescent lights caught the small tricolor ribbon pinned to the strap. Gunny Miller froze. Every Marine, from the newest boot to the most seasoned officer, knows the hierarchy of awards. They know the difference between a peacetime service medal and something earned when the shooting starts. Miller's eyes locked onto the small pin. He knew every thread, every color, the navy blue, gold, and scarlet of the combat action ribbon. The KR, not a medal for being in a war zone, but an award for actively engaging with or being engaged by the enemy. It was a badge of honor worn by grunts, by warriors, and it was on her bag. His blood ran cold, then hot with a furious protective rage. He looked back at her face, really looked this time, past the civilian clothes and the long blonde hair. He searched his memory, digging through years of deployments, training exercises and faces seen in passing. The name on the sailor's lips, Carter, was the final piece of the puzzle. It snapped into place with the force of a rifle bolt chambering around. Sergeant Carter, Abby, the combat engineer who had been attached to 3rd Battalion during the second push into the city. The one who could wire a breaching charge with the delicacy of a surgeon and handle a machine gun like she was born with it. The one the grunts all called the dozer because she never ever took a single step back. A low growl rumbled in Miller's chest. He slowly, deliberately placed his fork down. His junior Marines watched him, their own expressions turning serious as they mirrored their leader's mood. "Stay put," he ordered them, his voice a low rasp. "Don't move a muscle. But you watch." He pulled his phone from his pocket. He didn't dial the MPs or base security. That was too slow, too impersonal. This required a different touch. He scrolled through his contacts and found the number he was looking for. He didn't call. He sent a text, his thumb moving with furious precision. "Sir, Gunny Miller, you are not going to believe who Petty Officer Davies is harassing at the Trident Mess Hall right now. It's Sergeant Carter, the dozer. They just put their hands on her." He hit send. The message flew across the base, a digital flare cutting through the evening. Now the clock was ticking. The cavalry wasn't just on the way. It was already here, in a quiet, climate-controlled office in the Marine Expeditionary Force headquarters building a mile away. Major Evan Phillips was initialing the last of a mountain of routine paperwork. His day was almost over. He was thinking about a cold beer and a quiet evening when his phone buzzed on the desk. He glanced at the screen, saw it was from Gunny Miller, and his brow furrowed. Miller wasn't one for casual conversation. He read the text once, then a second time. Sergeant Carter, the dozer. The name hit him like a physical blow. It took him a moment to place it, to connect the legendary call sign to a face. He swiveled in his chair and typed the name Carter A into the global military personnel database. Her file appeared instantly. He clicked it open. The service photograph showed a much younger woman, her blonde hair pulled into a severe regulation bun under her 8-point cover. Her face was hard, her eyes impossibly old. He scanned the screen, his own breath catching in his chest. Sergeant Abigail Carter, Military Occupational Specialty 1371, Combat Engineer, 2 tours. He scrolled down to her awards and citations. The list was long: Purple Heart, Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal, with a V for Valor, Combat Action Ribbon, Presidential Unit Citation, Good Conduct Medals, Expert Rifle and Pistol Badges. But it was the narrative summary for the NAVCOM that made him stop, when her lead vehicle was struck by a command-detonated IED. Sergeant Carter, despite receiving a concussion and shrapnel wounds to her left arm and shoulder, immediately exited the disabled vehicle under heavy and accurate small arms fire. With complete disregard for her own safety, she laid down suppressive fire, allowing her wounded vehicle commander to be extracted. She then proceeded to pull the unconscious driver from the burning wreckage and drag him 30 meters to cover, returning fire throughout the entire action. Major Phillips read on, his knuckles white as he gripped his mouse. He remembered the reports from that engagement. It had been a brutal, chaotic fight, and she had been at the very center of it. He saw billets listed: platoon sergeant, chief demolitions expert, weapons and tactics instructor. She had been a legend, a quiet, unassuming NCO who was respected and slightly feared by Marines twice her size. And she was retired now, working as a civilian contractor on his base. A cold, precise rage settled over him. He stood up so fast his chair rolled back and hit the wall. He grabbed his cover from his desk. As he strode out of his office, he was already dialing his phone. "Master Sergeant," he said, his voice clipped and devoid of warmth. "My vehicle, front of the building." Now, back in the mess hall, Davies was high on his own perceived authority. Abigail's continued silence was, in his mind, an admission of guilt. He had won. He held up her ID between his thumb and forefinger, waving it at her like a prize. "You know I'm feeling generous," he announced to the room, which had grown unnervingly quiet. "I'm not going to call the MPs just yet, but you and I are going to take a walk, and you're going to explain to my Master Chief exactly how you got this ID. Impersonating a federal contractor is a serious offense. We could have you barred from this installation permanently." He laughed again, that same ugly, grating sound. "Maybe you'll think twice next time you try to scam a free dinner." That was the final overreach, the final arrogant insult that hung in the dead air. And then came the sound. It was not a shout. It was not a bang. It was the simple, distinct scrape of a wooden chair leg against a linoleum floor. Across the room, Gunnery Sergeant Miller pushed his chair back and stood. He did not look at the sailors. He looked directly at Abigail. He rose to his full height, his broad shoulders squared, his hands loose at his sides. He just stood, a silent granite statue of defiance. A heartbeat later, the young lance corporal at his table stood up, then the corporal next to him, then the sergeant. Within 5 seconds, all 12 Marines at Miller's table were on their feet, standing in silent, unified judgment. The sound rippled outwards. The next table, another group of Marines, saw what was happening. Chairs scraped. They stood, then another table, and another. It was a wave of silent, coordinated movement spreading through the massive hall. The low hum of conversation had completely vanished. The only sounds were the scrape of chair legs and the soft thud of dozens of pairs of boots planting firmly on the floor. One by one, every Marine in the mess hall got to their feet. Young PFCs with fresh haircuts, grizzled staff sergeants with hash marks climbing their sleeves, a pair of captains in the corner who quietly set down their forks and rose in unison. An entire section of the dining facility was now a silent forest of men and women in camouflage, all standing, all facing the 3 sailors and the woman in the blue top. The laughter died in Davies's throat. A knot of confusion and fear tightened in his stomach. He and his friends looked around, their smirks melting away, replaced by wide-eyed panic. The atmosphere in the room had shifted from a public space to a predator's enclosure, where they had suddenly realized they were the prey. The air was thick with unspoken menace. Hundreds of eyes were on them, not with overt aggression but with a cold, unified contempt that was far more terrifying. The main doors of the Trident mess hall swung open with a percussive bang that echoed in the tomb-like silence. Major Evan Phillips strode in, his eyes blazing. A formidable master sergeant flanked him, his expression grim. Their polished boots clicked on the floor, an unnervingly loud rhythm in the silent room. The standing Marines turned their heads to watch them pass, a subtle, almost imperceptible parting of the sea. The major did not slow down until he was standing directly in front of Abigail Carter. He completely ignored the three terrified sailors, as if they were nothing more than inanimate objects. He looked at Abigail, taking in the civilian clothes, the weary but steady look in her eyes. He brought his heels together with an audible click. He raised his right hand in the sharpest, most precise salute he had ever rendered. "Sergeant Carter," he said, his voice ringing with profound respect in the cavernous space. "It is an honor to see you on this base, ma'am." For the first time, Abigail's composure seemed to shift. A flicker of surprise, of a long-dormant instinct, crossed her face. Without hesitation, her training took over. She straightened, her posture snapping from relaxed civilian to the rigid attention of a Marine NCO, and returned the salute with equal precision. "Major Phillips," she replied, her voice steady. "Good to see you, sir." Major Phillips dropped his salute and turned, his gaze finally falling upon Petty Officer Davies. The full weight of his rank, his authority, and his cold fury descended on the sailor. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the silence like a razor. "Petty Officer Davies," he began, the words perfectly spaced. "Do you have any idea who you are speaking to?" Davies stammered, unable to form a coherent word. He just shook his head, his face pale. "You are currently illegally detaining and verbally assaulting Sergeant Abigail Carter," the major said, his eyes boring into the sailor. "United States Marine Corps, retired. On her second tour in Anbar Province, Sergeant Carter's vehicle was struck by a roadside bomb. With a severe concussion and shrapnel tearing through her arm, she exited the vehicle under a hail of enemy machine gun fire. She single-handedly suppressed an enemy ambush, saving the lives of her entire fire team. For that action, she was awarded the Purple Heart and the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal with a V for Valor. A collective intake of breath swept through the watching Marines. They were no longer just standing for one of their own. They were standing for a hero. The major wasn't finished. He took a step closer to Davies, whose eyes were now wide with dawning horror. "This Marine has cleared more IEDs than you've had hot meals. She is qualified as an expert with every weapon in a rifle platoon's arsenal. She has led Marines in combat. She has bled for the flag you wear on your shoulder. She has earned the right to eat in any mess hall in the entire Department of Defense. A right you tried to deny her because you saw a woman in a blue shirt and made a foolish, arrogant, and disgraceful assumption." He fell silent. The weight of his words settled over the room. The public vindication was absolute. The legend of the Dozer had just been recited chapter and verse in front of hundreds of active duty service members. Major Phillips turned his head slightly toward the Master Sergeant. "Master Sergeant, kindly escort these sailors to their command's Master Chief's office. I will be calling him personally in 5 minutes to ensure he understands the full gravity of their conduct. Their careers in the United States Navy are now subject to my official review." The Master Sergeant simply nodded, a grim smile touching his lips. He gestured for the three sailors, who looked as if they were about to be physically ill. They moved stiffly like robots and were led away, the silence of the mess hall following them out the door. With the antagonists gone, Major Phillips turned back to Abigail, his expression softening. "Sergeant, on behalf of this command, I am profoundly sorry that you had to endure that." Abigail looked at the major, then around at the sea of faces, at the silent, steadfast wall of Marines still standing at attention for her. A deep, unfamiliar emotion swelled in her chest. "It isn't about me, sir," she said, her voice clear and strong. "This was never about me. It's about ensuring the next person who walks in here, whether they're a Marine, a sailor, an airman, or a soldier, is judged by their character and their record, not by what they look like or what they're wearing. The standard is the standard. It's for everyone." Her words resonated, a perfect expression of the ethos she had lived by her entire career. It wasn't about softening standards. It was about applying them fairly to all. As she spoke, her mind flashed back not to the chaos of combat, but to a quiet, dusty moment long after the firelight had ended. A grizzled colonel, his face a roadmap of sun and stress, stood before her. The air was still thick with the smell of the explosion. He held the small combat action ribbon in his hand. He didn't make a long speech, he just looked her in the eye, his gaze filled with a respect that transcended rank, and pinned the ribbon to her stained and torn uniform. "You did good, Sergeant," was all he'd said. It was all that was needed. The ribbon wasn't a prize, it was an acknowledgement, a piece of a shared history written in gunpowder and sacrifice. The following days saw quiet but decisive changes on the base. Major Phillips made good on his word. A mandatory training refresher on professional conduct and preventing harassment was implemented for all hands. The base-wide standard operating procedure for ID verification was clarified and reissued. with a specific addendum about respectful treatment of contractors and veterans. In the Trident Mess Hall, a new plaque was mounted near the entrance, its brass letters gleaming, dedicated to all who have served, a place of respect for every warrior, past and present. About a week later, Abigail was browsing the aisles of the base exchange, picking up a few things on her way home. She turned a corner and nearly ran into a sailor coming the other way. It was Davies. He was alone, and the arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out look. He looked smaller without his friends and his bluster. He saw her and froze. For a moment he looked like he was going to bolt. Instead, he took a deep breath, stood up straight and walked toward her, stopping a respectful distance away. "Sergeant Carter," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. He couldn't meet her eyes. "Ma'am, there's no excuse for how I acted. It was dishonorable, and I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry for what I said and did to you." Abigail looked at him, her expression unreadable. She saw not the arrogant bully from the mess hall, but a chastened young man who had been handed a life-altering lesson. "Your apology is a start, petty officer," she said, her tone professional, not unkind. "What you do with it is what matters now. Learn from it. When you see one of your sailors, one of your peers, starting down that same path, you stop them. You teach them better. That's how you can begin to make it right." He finally looked up, meeting her gaze. He saw no lingering anger, only a clear and unwavering expectation. He nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am. I will." She gave him a curt nod in return and continued with her shopping, leaving him standing there in the aisle, a man who had confronted a hero and been given not vengeance, but a sliver of a chance at redemption. If this story of valor and respect resonates with you, please like, share, and subscribe to She Chose Valor. Join us as we continue to honor the service of our women in uniform and share the stories that deserve to be heard.